The real goal of this trio, and especially for myself, is to bring some of the pianistic things that I've played for years and bring that to the organ. That's my goal with this trio. And we'll do some traditional, and then there'll be some untraditional jazz funk things happening, because I'm not a purist. I like to keep the music elevating.
Hey, everybody, Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, chicagojazz.com, and welcome to another episode of Around Town. We are doing some Jazz Fest previews. Of course, the Chicago Jazz Fest coming up August 31st to September 3rd, right there in Millennium Park. And coming up on September 2nd, Saturday, from 1:50 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. is the Theodis Rodgers Organ Trio and the Van Freeman Pavilion. Of course, that's on the North Promenade, just north of the Bean, for those of you that know that area. And it just happens that we have Theodis here on Zoom to talk about that gig coming up. He's got so much stuff going on. I always preface this when I'm talking to people like Theodis. We could talk about his career for 4 hours. I'm going to have him back on because he's got an exciting show starting back up in Chicago. He's the music director. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this, but I want to focus on this organ trio gig that you have coming up at the fest. Theodis, thanks for jumping on for a few minutes. And how exciting is this? You're playing at the Jazz Fest with your own trio.
Oh, man, it is absolutely a dream come true. I actually, the last time I played the Jazz Festival had to be early 80s. And I was
really? I would have thought you would have played it since
I would have thought so too, but my career went other directions. But yeah, that was the last time I did that was in the 80s. It was and I was just a new kid on the block.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, well, I know you've been playing, you were playing Cabaret Zazu for a great run of that, and you have another show coming back here at the end of September. But I know in between and on those off days, you've been playing gigs with your trio and doing different things, because I watch your Facebook page all the time. And I should tell everybody, theojazzmusic.com gets you everywhere on all his social and all that stuff. So is this a group that you've been playing like steady with over the years as far as the guys?
This is a configuration I came up with maybe 2 years ago, and it all goes back to me getting back to my organ roots. I started organ when I was 6 years old, but I was a pop organist, played jazz, basically pop tunes and show tunes when I was coming up in the 60s. And the first organ music I heard as a kid was Jimmy Smith. My uncle would play his albums all the time. But up until the time I was 11, I was an organist, and I started jazz piano at that time. And from that point on, jazz piano just took me on. And but I've always wanted to get back to my organ roots, so that's why I'm so excited about this. I love the Hammond organ.
Well, talk a little bit about the organ, because I think some people know what the Hammond B3 organ is. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, for those of you that sort of know or that don't know at all, the thing with B3 organ is that the organist is actually kicking the bass and playing, comping, and soloing. And the traditional one is guitar and drum set, or saxophone and drum set, something like that. So talk a little bit. I mean, when you got into it, you kind of got to go all in on the organ if you really want to learn how to play it, right? It's a little different than just piano.
Okay, well, like I said, I started organ early. So my style of playing organ was more traditional. You have two manuals and bass pedals. So usually right hand plays the melody, left hand plays the chord accompaniment, and your feet play the bass. So that's the way I play organ. That's the way I was groomed to do it. But when I heard Jimmy Smith and I heard all this great bass work, I said, man, his feet sure are moving quick. But it turns out he was one of the brought along jazz organ and elevated it. And a lot of the bass lines he plays were in his left hand, which I didn't know. And he used the bass pedals to kind of give the music that drive. Along with playing the bass. But he plays pedals too, or he did play pedals too. But that's the thing. Melody, chords in the left hand, bass in the left hand, or bass in with the feet. So it's a whole thing with coordination. That's
the thing I love B3 organ. I saw Joey DeFrancesco and Jimmy Smith do a dueling organ thing one time, and it was like ridiculous. It was like
Oh yeah.
it was like insane. But the thing that I love about organ, and for those of you that know, I mean, I play drum set, and when I'm playing with an organist who really is laying it down, there's nothing more fun than that, because it's like being on a freight train, just running straight forward, man. And it's such a fat pocket.
It's a full sound, and that sound, that organ groove is really a thing between the bass, the organ, and the drummer. Drummer's got to be really solid as far as playing with an organ trio. It's a little different from piano, because usually you have the bass player, he can float over the changes, and maybe the drummer can float on top of that. But for an organ trio to groove, got to have a really solid drummer. And we do have a solid drummer. That's Mr. Charles Heath.
Oh yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the band, right? So it's yourself, obviously. Charles Heath's going to be playing drums.
Right.
Who else is in the group?
Michael Ross is on guitar. Chicago's on Michael Ross.
Yeah.
Guitarist and vocalist.
Oh man. So all right. So let's preview this a little bit. I mean, what can people expect to hear? Because first of all, I've heard B3 organ players, especially in the Von Freeman Pavilion at the Jazz Fest, and they get that bottom end cooking. Sometimes there's two Leslies up on the stage, so it's going to be thumping in there. What can people expect to hear at the fest? Are you doing some original things? Are you just playing straight ahead stuff? What can people expect to hear?
Man, what you're going to hear is just organ groove music. We're going to be laying on those blues. I'm going to do a tribute to Jimmy Smith, tribute to Joey DeFrancesco. And the real goal of this trio, and especially for myself, is to bring some of the pianistic things that I've played for years and bring that to the organ. That's my goal with this trio. And we'll do some traditional, and then there'll be some untraditional jazz funk things happening, because I'm not a purist. I like to keep the music elevating.
Talk a little bit, because I love hearing this, and I know you first heard Jimmy Smith, but I mean, you're coming up in the 60s and 70s, man, and that's like prime time in Chicago for clubs and for seeing live music, and you were playing as well, all this stuff. But did you see Jimmy in town? I mean, where did you see him? Because
I saw Jimmy a few times at the Jazz Showcase.
Okay, the one over on Rush?
Oh, the one on no, actually, when it was in the Blackstone.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
Jimmy. So there, I think, who was in that group? Phil Upchurch. And the drummer, I don't remember, but he was interesting. I played for him at that time, and I was a young guy, and he goes, he said, "You got piano fingers." I guess the way I was playing, because the touch on playing a Hammond and a piano is two different touch, and sometimes, and that's the other thing I had to get used to. Piano, it's real forceful and more physical. With the organ, your fingers kind of float on the keys. So it's a whole different feel. It's not as, sometimes I tend to be a little aggressive on it, like moving my body a lot, but you really don't have to do that. But I met Jimmy, and that was the first thing he said about my playing. He says, "You play like a piano player." So I guess there is a distinct difference there.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit too, because you play all different genres.
Yes.
And I know I've seen you play with blues musicians, you've played with jazz musicians, you've accompanied large ensembles, you've done commercial stuff, you've played things and everything. I mean, what do you like playing the most? I mean, is there something that you love, or it's just because you just love all the different kinds of music?
Psychologists have coined a phrase for people like me. They're called bi-musical. That's crazy. But it's like I enjoy all musical forms. Like I said, early pop, early show tunes. Then I moved into jazz piano. And then there was a period in school and college I left to go on the road with a rock band. That's a whole nother story. Lovecraft. So I love it all. My first love is jazz, though. Oscar Peterson, Monty Alexander. Used to hang out with Monty quite a bit. So,
So talk a little bit. Now you've got the Theodis Rodgers organ trio coming up, 1:50 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. Von Freeman Pavilion, North Promenade, September 2nd, Saturday at the Chicago Jazz Fest. Of course, we've got everything at chicagojazz.com as far as the Jazz Fest goes. But you and I did an interview, and I think a lot of people watching this probably saw that when you were actually playing for a long-running show here in Chicago, the Cabaret Zazu.
Yeah.
But now you've got another one coming back, which is exciting, which we're going to have you back on to talk about, because you and I are going to talk all about this another time, because so we got more time. But just preview this a little bit, because Teatro Zinzanni is coming back to Chicago.
Yes, it's back in Chicago. We're in pre-production for the show right now. Whole new cast, same band though. Band stays the same, but it's going to be quite exciting. I'm looking forward to it, being the music director and having a big part in choosing the selections for the show.
You know, you and I talked about the Cabaret Zazu, and I'm assuming this is going to be very similar, but a lot of your improvisational skills came into the Cabaret Zazu, which I'm sure it's going to come back to the Teatro Zinzanni, because you're watching people play, you're watching people perform, and you have to go with them. And that's a difficult thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, to underscore and keeping the musical flow together. And I've had a lot of experiences doing that. Back in the past, I've worked with the magician Harry Blackstone Jr. when I was a kid. And Rodney Dangerfield, playing incidental music through his comedy routines. So like I said, I've covered a lot of genres in my lifetime. So this kind of made me ready for this opportunity.
Well, you're a very busy man, one of the hardest working men in show business here, because you're going to be working constantly once this show starts. You're playing the Chicago Jazz Fest. I know you have a few other hits coming in and out.
Yeah.
After that, and probably throughout the entire fall. So all the information at theojazzmusic.com. And man, I'm excited to hear your trio play at the Jazz Fest, man. I love it. It's going to be grooving.
Yeah, a lot of people are kind of surprised because they know I have piano. They play piano, but they just don't realize my love for Hammond organ. And Hammond organ clones. I have a Legend Live. The other thing about Hammond organs, they're 500 pounds.
Mm-hmm. Ask Greg Rockingham about that.
I know. Yeah, so.
He's got two of them in his van driving him around. I'm just like, oh my God, Greg. Yeah. All right. Well, Theodis, thanks so much for jumping on, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Jazz Fest, and of course, getting all the information about the new show, which we'll jump on later on in September and talk about that as well.
Great.
And thanks to everybody. Oh, absolutely. And thanks everybody. As I always say, all the information is at chicagojazz.com. And until next time, hopefully I will see somebody out on the scene.